Welcome to our class on the Avadhut and his 24 teachers in nature and his great stotram that he writes about it. We'll be beginning in a few minutes. Om Vachanyachatmani Tam Nyacham Buddhao Diyam Yachacha Buddhi Sakshini Tam Chapi Purnatmani Nirvikalpe Vilapya Shantim Paramam Bhajasvam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The practitioner of blissful dissolution joins the word to the mind to the intelligence to the ego to the witness to the Atman. Then the Atman joins to Brahman. Brahman is the soul in all. In this way, do those practitioners of blissful dissolution enjoy and experience eternal peace and ecstatic bliss. And there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, and with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. So we begin this 8th class in a series of classes that have to do with this great being called the Avadhut. There are yogis, there are seers, there are sages, there are rishis, there are avadhuts, and sages, saints. There are all sorts of holy beings. Probably help us to know that on this planet, that they're still there and they're transmitting these highest teachings to us if we'll take the time to quiet the mind and join it to the witness as Shankara just chanted. That is, I chanted, but Shankara's slokas out of the Vivekachudamani. Vivekachudamani means the crest jewel of discrimination. And the word discrimination to us in Vedanta means knowing the difference between the real and the unreal. And it's not such a new concept or principle. Christ talked about it in terms of wheat from the chaff. The father of Samkhya Yoga in early days talked about it as the difference between the Purusha, the indweller in the city of 9 gates. The body is the 9 gates city, and the indweller is that consciousness. And the difference between that and Prakriti, or nature. In India, they always knew that nature had a manifested side and a non-manifested side. So in the unmanifested side, which you experience in your deep sleep state tonight, not in your dreaming or not in your waking, because there the seeds have been watered. And they're being watered every night and every day by you. It's one of the great teachings that the Avadhut says here, Stanatrayam yadi chaneti katam turyam. Turyam is the 4th state of consciousness. But Stanatrayam is waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So Advaita Vedanta and those great rishis who studied consciousness as its own separate entity, not as associated necessarily with nature or with the body or senses or with the 6 passions and 8 fetters and the 5 kleshas and all the problems and manifestations and expressions of human life and relativity. And they took it out and they saw it as this separate divine entity. And they wondered how it got into bondage. And on the other hand, why some or most got into bondage and some got into kind of a playful sport. That's the difference between those words Maya and Leela in our tradition. So in Vedanta, we look at these 3 states of awareness as a type of ignorance that we fell into. That is, when consciousness was free of all false superimpositions, all overlays, all divisions, all compartmentalization, as we were talking about last week, and doesn't accept any conditionings that come from the mind in Maya, then it looks upon itself as unbound, or as Vivekananda said, ever free, never bound. And he coined that phrase, acreate, so that in English we would have a word that was like the Sanskrit ajati. Ajati means no birth, no death. So when the seers say ajati, and we started out 8 classes ago in the series talking about ajati, how the soul is never born, never dies. And that broaches the subject of non-duality, which has a sort of following nowadays, and it's beginning to come to the fore in some people's minds. But to keep the original Advaita Vedanta of India in mind is what my teacher used to say. That Indian Advaita has this very rare and ancient thread running through it, which is much like we just said, the Sakshi Bhutam, the witness consciousness and everything. And so if you can, although I know there's a lot of talk about what you identify with nowadays, but if I had my say amongst the people who are arguing about that, I would say we don't identify with anything in Vedanta. We only associate with it. So if you want to transcend something, then it doesn't have to do with a transformation from one thing to another. So this word ajati also means non-transformation. And people are going through, including our intelligent scientists, are moving through this fascination with transformation. If it doesn't change, they're not interested in it. But that's exactly opposite of what these rishis wanted to see. They wanted to finally see And we don't know how many lifetimes they took to arrive at that mature place. They wanted to see the one thing that doesn't change. The one remains the same, the many change in path. Life is a multicolored dome that stains the pure white light of reality, as the poet Shelley said. So I think about the mind as a dome, and the light of consciousness is coming through it, but it hits this many-colored dome of the mind, and light refracts through these different colored windows or glasses and turns into things like worlds and beings and animals and trees and angels and celestials and elementals and everything that's spread out across the whole warp and woof of what they're calling creation, preservation, and destruction. But ajati in Sanskrit means, and Avadhut is telling us this, the soul doesn't transform, it doesn't change. So it's never born and it never dies. So Vivekananda heard us talking in this way and saw that we had a kind of Frankensteinian philosophy around it in religion, is that we thought God was somewhere up there, and it created the soul out of nothing, or out of dust maybe. And then it had a gender too, you see. And it participated in birth, life, and death. So when they started, Vivekananda saw that many people were still involved in this in 1893 when he came here. Then he was saying, I've got a word for you, it's called acreate, that the soul is never created. It's never, so therefore it can't be destroyed. So Shankara, whom I just chanted, sings about that. Namrichor na Shanka, Name Jati Beda, Pita Naiva Me Naiva, Mata Majanmaha, Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham, Shivoham. He sings Namrichor, Na Shanka, Name Jati, Ajati, see, Name Jati Beda. So he turns it backwards on us, because we're tending to look at death as something morbid. It's just that it's illusory, that's all. So it can't ultimately be anything but an illusion, because the soul is unborn, ajati, acreate. But he puts it like this, I have no death. He starts us out this way, nam richor, richor means death. So nam richor, name jati beda. So he says, I never had a death. So if he stopped there, and his students, who were very astute, I mean, they were like the students of, like, say, Jesus, who were fishermen and tax collectors, but Shankar had these very astute, philosophically attuned, Nondual students in India back in 700 AD, roughly. So if he said, I have no death, how can you say that, sir? Because I never had a birth. Name jati beda. So you take them off guard, you see. So body has a birth, beings have births and bodies, but he's going straight to the very Vedanta 101 premise, you see, of you're not the body. And there are souls like Ramana Maharshi who would say, who am I then? You see, and bring out this beautiful teaching of Atma Vichara, it's called. We have to inquire into the nature of consciousness. And when we do, we'll find out that it's neither born nor does it die. The best word for us is eternal. But if you want to pair up something that doesn't have an opposite, you see, because if you say eternal, someone's thinking non-eternal. You see life, someone's thinking death. If you say pleasure, someone's thinking pain. If you say freedom, someone's thinking bondage. And so you have to find some way to describe to them a freedom that's unbound, because it never had a beginning, middle, or end. And this is exactly what Krishna teaches Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita on the battlefield early on. if you've read the Gita. See, it says, I've had many bodies. I've been reborn many times, but the soul is unborn, the Atman. That's my true nature. And my external nature is Prakriti, nature, with its 24 cosmic principles. Back then, they were calling them 8-fold body, 5 elements, a mind, pure astika was the word. So I have this external nature, and we looked at that 2 Sundays ago. Well, there was a break there for a seminar, but some Sundays ago, we looked at that fascination with samsara, that people are caught on this wheel of birth and death, Lord Buddha says, and they don't expect that there's anything beyond that. And one of the ways in which Ramana Maharshi taught Atmavichara, who am I, and so forth, Naham, Saham, Kaham is how he taught it, is that, well, I'm none of that. What am I then? I'm that, you see. So he takes the soul off guard again with this very astute line of questioning that is about things that they don't think about when they're caught in a loop, in samsara, or how Buddhists borrowed that. So we say in Maya, it's a nice word in our tradition to say that. Maya is time, space, causation, name, and form. Nama, Rupa, Desha, Kala, Nimitta. So the Avadhut has been through all of the teachings of the schools of Avadhut. There are different schools. Some of them are Nagas, they're naked ones. They'll walk around without any clothes, just with ash smeared on themselves. And there are other schools of Avadhuts too. And he's coming forth with these teachings and these verses, of which we've studied now 18 of them as of last week. And I must admit, I am taking certain parts out of each of these verses and focusing on them with visuals so that we can understand the depth of his actually very simple words. Even the Sanskrit here is rather simple. So last week, for instance, we had niskampa kampa. So nis means, of course, or near means, made extinct. So he's trying to tell us that there are no divisions in the Atman. There's no partitions. It doesn't get delimited. And it stays as it is all the time. So it's changeless, or this English word would be immutable. So if he comes at us with that kind of simple Sanskrit term, even as far away as hundreds of years later or thousands of years later, then maybe even people in America can sit up and say, that makes sense to me. I have a waking state, I have a dreaming state, and I have a deep sleep state. And then I know my essence is beyond those things. I chanted at the beginning of the class, let's just join the words to the mind, because that's where they came from. There's a beautiful quote by Ramana Maharshi the other day where he said, if there are no thoughts, there's no mind, basically is how he put it. So it's thought that projects everything. And it rides on this Garuda bird called prana, outwardly from its source, which is the mind. But if the mind is taken away in yogic fashion, yoga chitta and vritti, chitta vrittis are vibrations, nirodha, if they're destroyed or cut out, then the soul can sit in its own divine nature, nameless, formless, and realize it's a create. But it's going to take some time to get rid of or through those conditionings that society and upbringing, ancestors, Buddha talked about ancestors, have run the riot act on you to make you believe otherwise and think you're something different than you truly are. So in this little introduction, which I always take 5 or 10 minutes because 6 days has gone by before we took the last verses, then I'm trying to bring us back to this main point in Advaita Vedanta, which is really one of these main pillars of non-duality. Non-duality, again, being a word in English that many of us are beginning to gravitate to. to do away with the superstitions of fundamentalist religion and to clarify the cloudiness of philosophy in the West based on money making and argumentation and at the best rationale. We have to get beyond reasoning to use reasoning to get beyond it. And so these great souls we look at then, Avadhut, seers, saints, rishis, yogis, so forth, they have this unique perspective that many of us are lacking, particularly in this Kali Yuga, we call it, this age of darkness, where somehow all of our spiritual knowledge has gone missing. And we're focused just on things that change, like change of billings for the second fast, that kind of change. Like a scientist looking into an electron microscope, it's just so fast that it pulls the wool over your eyes. You don't know that it's changing too fast to exist. As an object, it must exist something much swifter, like a thought. And if I can get to that swiftness of the thought, then I might be able to find the mother of all thoughts. I'm looking past the camera right now to our altar and seeing the image of Mother Saraswati. She's the goddess of the words. And so in her, thought is just lightning swift, faster than the fastest, higher than the highest, slower than the slowest, lower than the lowest. That's how they describe Shakti, Divine Mother, in the scriptures of our tradition. So, recalling our minds to this unique station of mind, if it could be called a station, then we find the Avadhut singing to us the next three verses, which I'd like to introduce to you now, which are 19, 20, and 21. The Chalisa is a 40-verse thing. So when I looked through this great scripture, Avadhuta Gita, which is just like pure truth with nothing attached to it, it's the most concise and terse and essentialized kind of scripture. It's called a revealed scripture in India. And there's another one called Ashtavakra Samhita. These two books are, I mean, even Sri Krishna kept Ashtavakra Samhita near him, and he wasn't a book learning kind of person, as we know. So inside of the Avadhuta Gita, chapter 3, I came upon these 40 verses that end with this refrain. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So he ends all of these 40 verses with that refrain. Gyanamritam, I am the nectar of wisdom. Samarasam, which has conveyed to me exquisite bliss. Rasam is bliss. But samarasam is like what's even more refined than just the bliss you would get out of, say, a good Indian food meal, you see. They use that word rasam, you see. And then gagano, what's that? Sky, ether. Aham, I am like the sky, like the ether, indivisible and transcendent, impossible to taint. So here's another beautiful principle of Advaita Vedanta that comes along with unborn, undying, ajati, is this declaration of innate purity. You can't taint it. Not only can you not destroy it, akshar, you can't taint it. And so we chanted at the beginning of class last time about Sadanga Yoga. You see, the six-limb yoga. Sadanga Yoga natu naiva shudam, Guru Padesham, the Guru's feet. Natu naiva shudam, Manavanasham, the mind's thoughts. Natu naiva shudam. It means you can't get the soul purified by the six-limb yoga. You can't purify the soul by bowing at the Guru's feet. You can't purify the soul by destroying the mind's waves. It's already pure. And so again, that would take you off guard, because it's not that you shouldn't practice the six-limb yoga or bow down at the luminous soul's feet. There are many reasons to do that. Or study, Ramana Maharshi's art of dissolving the mind waves, or Patanjali's art of the chitta vrittis, and that'll all prepare you for this experience, which can only come by God's grace. So Advaita Vedanta is a totally God-affirming philosophy. And people are mistaking it, saying, oh, it got rid of God, it got rid of religion, it got rid of philosophy. But I beg to differ, that it's just that it can't be described, that Brahman. And so Avadhut is going on using this kind of language in which he's grasping, maybe at straws, but they're philosophical straws, in order to find words in the ancient Sanskrit called Deva Bhashya, which is the language of the gods. It's a divine language, the ancient language of the world, in order which to describe the indescribable. So these verses he goes on singing. Ragari dosharahitam tvaham eva tatvam daivadi dosharahitam tvaham eva tatvam samsara shokarahitam taham eva tatvam jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham stanatrayam yadicha netikatam turyam kalatrayam yadicha netikatam dishascha shantam padam hi paramam paramartha tatvam jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham dirgolagu punariti haname vibhago nistara sankatam iti haname vibhaha konam hi vartulam iti hiname vibhaga jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So the words of the Avadhut come at us from out of ancient time with these three verses. I'll give you the straight English to it as best as could be described. That first verse, it's just 19 of the 40 verses of Chalisa. We're calling this the Jnanamritam Stotram, or Chalisa. And pulling it out of that third chapter and making it its own separate existing piece. So he says in the 19th chapter, the six passions are like sons and daughters of a barren woman, to Brahman. Supernatural legerdemain, supernatural agencies with their legerdemain over souls are a chimerical illusion to it. What to speak of these? The physical world and its many blemishes cannot touch me. For I am pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. I do not know of a fourth state when the first three are already non-existent. The 4, 8, and 16 directions surely cannot exist when the three phases of time are seen to be unreal. Throughout all, for me, Brahman is the supreme abode of peace, and I am that. Pure existence, wisdom, and bliss. as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. In the self of Atman, all-pervasive, imaginings such as divisions and dimensions disappear. Width, length, depth, height, all are so many angular projections of the creative mind. So forget them, renounce them, because you are pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So his message is anything but surface or light. He goes deep even with the words he chooses. And last week at this class, you remember we talked about the difference between stillness and vibration, and the difference between doubt and determination, and how both these dualities disappear into Brahman. And so these great souls are not someone who gets caught in either one. See, oh, I'm doubting right now. I think I'll get determined. They take both of these dualities and they rise over them. Because determination quite often will lead back to doubt and vice versa. So they're seeing how these pairs of opposites are simply deluding. Krishna calls them dvandva mohena. Moha means to be deluded, and dvandva means two. So twos delude you, he tells Arjuna on the battlefield, like birth and death. So there are some dualities that are much subtler to meditate on in order to get rid of them, but this is what he's talking about. Renounce them, forget them. You're spending too much time brooding on them, when you're really pure existence, knowledge, and bliss. It's boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So you take these alambanas, it's a rather hard word to describe in English, but you take these stations for meditation, like I think I'll meditate on the sun, eternal light, or I'll think I'll meditate on the ocean. You see, it's got waves, then it's still. Or I'll meditate on the moon. It's so pure, oh, but it's got blemishes. So you take these beautiful stations of meditation and you liken yourself to them in order to convince yourself that you are transcendent of these deluding pairs of opposites. Pleasure, pain, good and bad, virtue and vice, a big one today for the West, life and death, bondage and liberation. And one of the highest ones is form and formlessness. So if you can crack these nuts, you take them both and you meditate upon them, and then you find a triputi for them. Right? We looked at that at the last seminar, right? There's a third way to all of these dualities that you find is a gate out. Well, there's the extreme path, and then that's higher, and then there's the fundamentalist path that's lower. But what about the middle way? So there's always this third kind of path that opens up to you in any set of dualities that comes at you. And so the Avadhut's very good at having found these already, but now he's trying to be very expressive in how these get realized. So one of these things he said last week that I wanted to take up before we go on is this statement here. One cannot divide what is indivisible or assign indivisibility a description. Incarnating out and evolving back in is senseless to the ever-stationary Brahman. So here we've come across this teaching of rebirth, right, which most of the religions of the day haven't taken seriously yet. But of course, India has accepted it for so long, for so many centuries and millennia, that it's just obvious that all of these things are being experienced in the cycle of rebirth. Because in 550 years before Christ, Buddha was proclaiming it, and that was a late date for India. There'd already been so many great souls that had come before Buddha who were proclaiming these non-dual truths. And the seers were getting illumined by them. It's where words like moksha came from, and mukti, and kaivalya, and nirvikalpa, the sampragyata. Later on in Japan, satori, because that 52 generations later, India came to Japan and Zen. So you had all these great words and these great souls who had to think about them, like Koivalya. Koivalya meant, I finally got separation from nature. And so if you say that to most people, they say, ouch, I don't want to separate from nature. But he just said 6 passions, and the 6 transformations that Buddha talked about, all happen in nature. So birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. Those are the 6 transformations. Those all belong to nature. So when Krishna tells Arjuna about that, he says, everything that comes, all your karma happened in nature. It didn't happen in yourself. And it'll go back into nature when you neutralize it. Everything comes up out of nature, like trees out of seeds. And then they'll go back to seeds at the end. This is Prakriti in its 2 forms, manifested nature, unmanifested nature. This show is deluding us and causing us to fall into this circle of samsara. And then we start considering bondage and liberation. So when the Avadhut considers bondage and liberation and rebirth and all that, he's thinking, well, I really never, like Shankar, I really never had a death because I was never born. So why am I worried about liberation? So they're coming from this precious Advaita, or non-dual realization that they had. And it made so much sense to them, it was so attracting, that they destroyed all the superstitions of religion, and they transcended all the opinions of philosophy, and they came to rest in their own consciousness, pure, eternal, indivisible, birthless, deathless, changeless. And this is what now he has to bring up for other people, you see. Incarnating out and involving back in is senseless to Brahman. So the Almighty Father, Allah, Brahman, God, the Great Spirit, however you call this ultimate reality, then, has to be seen as being unaffected by any of these changes that go on in relativity. Like the relationship between Purusha and Prakriti. If you want Kaivalya, then you'll slowly separate yourself out from your identification with nature, which doesn't mean that you can't associate with it. Because in India, they had this great penultimate realization, you might say, called Kaivalya, where you separated yourself out from nature, and you became the witness of all these things. And you realized that all of those things are happening in a dream, that you're the awakened one. That's what Buddha called himself. You can call me anything you want, he said at the end of his life, but you must know I'm awakened. So he's an awakened intelligence. Buddhi means intelligence, and it's different than an intellect. An intellect is a holder. A scientist has an intellect full of knowledge, but that knowledge is actually pinning him down and creating a barrier between himself and the goddess of wisdom, whom is the source of it. So the ego in the scientist is saying, this is my knowledge. The ego in the mathematician is saying, this is my knowledge. And every being who's got a profession is saying, this is my knowledge, and the ego is stepping forward to own these things. Meanwhile, the mother of the universe is laughing at them all. See? But in the case of somebody like our Paramahamsa, Sri Ramakrishna, he gave it all away to Mother Kali. See, I know nothing, Mother, you know everything. And because he did that, she filled him with it, because he wasn't grasping onto it. See, it just flowed through him, like it's flowing through the Avadhut here. So when he's talking about birth and rebirth and death, then we should probably look at this possibility for human beings. If they want to get free, be liberated, then it would offer up a palette of conscious future lives. Now, this isn't just hearsay, because Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about his past lives to Arjuna. He said, "Oh, Arjuna, I've had many past lives, so have you, but I know all mine. But you're not aware of yours yet. So at some point, when you're meditating, you'll become aware of something that occurred to you in a previous lifetime." And it's pretty obvious to yoga psychologists anyway, not necessarily Western psychologists, because they haven't arrived there yet. Even Freud and Jung did not arrive there yet. But that everything that happens to you in this life is due to your past karma or your past births, actions you did there. And then all of a sudden it's manifesting. And these are not just psychoses or memories. They're actually samskaras. There's just no word for it in English. And they've been studying samskaras for time out of mind in India. Those mental impressions that caused them, their children, their ancestors, to act and be who they are, or think they are in this case. So if you got rid of your samskaras around it, you'd pretty soon know that you would be free to choose, like the Tibetan Buddhists have been teaching us lately. You've been free to choose your next birth. The requisite for that would be a conscious death, you see. That's what probably is not being said enough. So you're going to have to live in this lifetime towards that moment of death so you can exit the body consciously, which means you're going to have to know the kingdoms of heaven within you. You're going to have to know about things like chakras or lokas, inner worlds, the kingdoms of heaven within you. My Father's castle has many chambers, however you want to put that, the basic souls have put this, and that there are channels that you have to open up in order to go there. And everyone actually has a highway. It's called the Sushumna, the central spine. It's not the bony spine, but it's what it represents. Inwards to dream state. So it hasn't really been said much yet, but heaven is your dreams. It's not like I'm going to heaven up there. People talk about, oh, please, forgive them. So the Advaitist or non-dualist is standing next to the guy praying going, who's he talking to? You see? Because there's no one up there. If you were to go, please forgive them, and look inside, then he might connect with you, see? So you're going inside these internal channels called nadis that yogis know about and yoginis know about. See? And you actually have to do it consciously. So first thing you're going to have to do is to think it so. If the mind thinks it so, it will be. That's how powerful the mind is. So, Ajati, where is the creation coming from? It's coming from the mind. These are called the mind-only schools in India. Buddhism's one of them. Vedanta's another. They've known for a long time that when the mind vibrates, the worlds happen. And when it stops vibrating, they stop. But people are taking the happening of it literally, you see, like solidity in earth, liquidity in water, homogeneity in air, and so forth. They don't know the tattvas and how they connect to the senses, and how the senses connect to the dream senses, and then how the dream senses connect to the mind. Those are channels they haven't opened up yet. It's all outward, you see. So the Mundaka Upanishad says, the senses are defective by nature because they're always going outward. And then the yogis come along and say, well, okay, let's reverse that trend. Take your senses off the objects and bring them in to the heart. And as you bring them into the heart, you'll encounter your dream senses. And then you'll encounter the mind. And then you'll encounter all the bodies that the mind's creating for you. It's not your parents that are creating your bodies for you. It's your mind of the parents that's creating the bodies for you and the way they think. So then back to conscious death, and he's talking about, they're talking about, and I put this together as a kind of composite, the different colors that you can paint with if you are soaking in the Dharmic teachings. If you get very much enamored of the Gyan, the Gyanatma, Vijnanatma, the wisdom of the self. Not the wisdom, knowledge, lower knowledge out here, but the higher wisdom of the self will become that which informs you. And you'll be listening to this new voice now, this great voice inside, the voice of the great self, not the voice of the small self. Buddha mentioned that in the Dhammapada. So this palette of future lives, I'll go through it quickly. You can see some of these in your palette, some of these things that you'd be able to paint with. For instance, the person who's thinking in an advanced way like this, let's call it Vedantically, because we're here amongst the Vedanta atmosphere, will collect the country and culture of their choice. They'll assume the gender and physical body of their choice. And I'm not saying that all people don't do this, all people do. I'm just saying some people do it consciously. And so they're not confused when they arrive here about anything. See, they also arrange life circumstances in order to neutralize karma. So if you're saying, well, I've got something to work out in my karma, I'm going to put that particular guru in my way. So I'm going to be born with that person to influence me. Or I'm going to take dharmic parents this time, instead of parents ignorant of the truth. Krishna says, oh, a birth like that's very hard. Parents like that are very hard to find in this world. And he's telling Arjuna that in a previous age, when they did have some spiritual wherewithal in their minds. But now, who's got it? Where are the parents that are teaching you the Dharma, unless you go far east, Tibet? A lot of this is coming from Tibet, and Tibet got it from India 700 years before Marpa brought it across the border into Tibet and gave it to Milarepa. You know about that, because you've been staying at a monastery of that teaching. So to neutralize karma, if you've got something in the way, you're going to say, well, I need to work this out. I'm going to choose those parents, that country, this gender, and that set of life circumstances. I'm going to put growth in my way, you see. I'm going to put austerity in my way. I'm going to put renunciation in my way. I'm going to topple a tree in front of the path, so I have to jump over it. And so they take on these lifetimes that are full of austerity, renunciation, strength building, boldness, what Vivekananda called man-making. And others can come on vacation, you see. I'll just live a life of wealth and ease, you see. And I won't help anyone as I do it. So select the manifestation of one's work and mission in life. Hopefully you can come forward because you heard it from an acharya or a teacher, a guru, or a preceptor. This Nondual perspective, like I got from Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bless be upon him. So he talked to me and told me, opened me up to the non-dual perspective when I went to the Vedanta Society in my 20s. And so that caught my ear, see, because I had heard religion and I had studied philosophy and various things of different religions. But when the non-dual was told to me, I perked up, you see. So hopefully you will too, because that's going to cut away a lot of superfluous barnacles, you see, on the whole of your ship. You've got enough weight here with what he's talking about here. You know, 6 passions, the 8 fetters, the 5 kleshas. He's saying all of this is nonsense to the one who's free. They don't exist anymore, but people are clinging to them as if they're real. But I started out the class saying discrimination between the real and the unreal is what Vedanta wants first and foremost from us. So you won't be able to go to a teacher like him, a Swami from India, who's the real thing, real authentic thing, without hearing about neti neti, or without hearing about vivarta, false superimposition. and without hearing about Ajati, non-birth, non-death of the soul, because they're not teaching that anywhere else. You're born. Church says so, family says so, and you're going to die. They all accept death. But Ajati is, there's Ajati, if we want one word in English that suits Ajati, it's non-origination. They finally thought about Gaudapadha's teachings. It was Shankara's guru, and said, how can we come up with a word that describes Ajati in English? Non-origination. Everything has no origin. It just rises out of the mind and falls into mind. This is also a favorite Buddhist teaching. Praticca samutpata. Everything just rises from the mind, plays, falls back in. So if you're, again, meditating on the ocean, this is what it should be telling you. Not it's a sunny day, it's a cloudy day, there's waves, there's not. What the ocean is trying to tell you is that here's your mind, and it's projecting everything, and it's drawing it back in. It's all about projection and withdrawal, and you get hypnotized by this. Who's watching that? You know, who am I? They said, where's the witness of all that? So in deep sleep, you would be doing this too, and in dream. So if you have a lucid dream, I wouldn't say it's because, oh, I found out how to do things great back on Earth. Like everyone's writing books about that, right? I want to be a lucid dreamer, they used to tell me back in the 80s and so forth. I said, no, you want to be a non-dreamer. You want to wake up. Because there's a witness looking on the dream. And if you want to get things in dream, you just want to desire things back on Earth, that's called samsara in India. That's what got you on this loop that you can't get off of. Give it up, renounce it. Be bold, be strong. Stand firm in your unborn, undying self. And make that your philosophy for life. Advaita Vedanta. Make that your ultimate philosophy. The greatest philosophy the world has ever seen, quote, Swami Vivekananda, unquote, is Advaita Vedanta. It just immediately strips away all superstitions from religion, clears the playing field of competitive philosophies, and puts you at the truth. That's what you're after, isn't it? With a capital T. I want to finally hear the truth, like I heard from him, you see. So other things on your palette here that you're painting for your next lifetime, because you're setting yourself up for liberation. Ironically, you're already free. Don't forget that. Because some of these people who think they know Nondual who are telling, I'm already free, I don't need to practice. I'm already free, I don't need to listen to you, Babaji. I don't need to study this non-dual scripture. I don't need to listen to Ramana Maharshi. I don't need a guru and so forth. But that's not the way I ever understood the great souls when they taught, is that you set yourself up for grace this way. And grace is the only thing that will free you. The only thing is God's grace. So you have to, Sri Ramakrishna used to say that, the wind of God's grace, oh, that's always blowing, but nobody's raising their sail, you see. Nobody's raising their sail to catch it. Or you say, they're looking up in the sky and, oh, there's no wind today. The winds of God's grace doesn't exist. But then they put a kite up and, you find it's blowing 50 miles an hour up there. So you've got to put the kite of your mind, your aspirations, in the way of that mad elephant that's coming at you. Call it Mother Kali, or non-dual philosophy. Say, kill me. I'll prove that I'm birthless and deathless. Destroy me. I dare you. And great souls are coming back with this philosophy. See, I told you I never died. See, I'm back. This is that old refrain, right? But nobody believed them because they didn't know the bardo after death, and then the bardo of rebirth, choosing your parents, the bardo of selecting your next lifetime, and based on getting free from all lifetimes. That's missing for most people. If they find out that, and we do believe in rebirth, they just want more fun on the world, more desires. But you can be free right now if you get rid of your desires, Holy Mother said. Holy Mother was his guru, Sri Sharda Devi. So you can be free right now if you become nirvasana, free of desires. So this is why if you have any desires at all, make them the desire for God realization. Turn them into that. So the last of these here, sincere compassion to help all beings gain emancipation. The compassion is a deep quality of Buddhism and original Christianity with Jesus. And then this one here, experience a conscious death at the exit of the last lifetime. I was reading today, one of the great seers said, well, everybody knows and they've heard that whatever happens to the person at death is because of their thoughts at the time of death. But what's nobody's saying is that what happens to the yogi at the time of death is because of their thoughts too. So their thoughts have become so elevated, they're not worried about becoming a deer in their last lifetime, in their next lifetime, because King Bharata did in the stories of India. He loved his deer so much that he thought about it at the time of his death, so he became a deer, you see. But that doesn't happen to a realized soul. That only happens to fools, people who have been fooled by nature, fooled by Maya, fooled by their ancestors in the wheel of samsara, and who have never heard this truth that will unwrap all those lies. The superstitions of religion, away with them. Hell, eternal damnation, doesn't sound like a God I would want to worship, see. How about the God of my own self? Pure, birthless, deathless, infinite, eternal. There's a God I can get behind. So, as we went around the circle here, spiritual practice and attainment in previous lifetimes. So I mentioned that pretty well early on. In order to have a conscious death, you're probably going to have to start practicing seriously right now. And if you believe in past karma, present karma, and future karma, then the only sensible thing is to say, I've got present karma that's in my way right now. I need to get rid of it right now, or it'll become agami karma in the future. So sanchita is in the back of you. It's why you were born, because you have this karma that you wanted a body, you wanted desires, you wanted five senses, you wanted relationships, you wanted everything. But then all of a sudden, you were born with that and you brought some of that prarabdha karma forward. Prarabdha means the karma that you're living right now. And in order to neutralize that so that it won't become the karma of the future in the next lifetime, you need to neutralize it right now. Turn the laser on that. And so they'll give you regimens of practice, like the 8 limbs of yoga or the Fourfold Noble Truths, or whatever it is in your tradition that they want you to adhere to. And then finally, as we run around the circle, you come here to attain Jivan Mukti in a last lifetime. So if you have gained truth, Jivan Mukti in this lifetime, then you're free from then on. And that's where Avadhut is singing from. Freedom and bondage don't make sense to me because I'm one with Brahman. So this is why I'm using this chart. Incarnating out and involving back is senseless to me now, because I lived my last lifetime in ignorance. And I got my first lifetime as a living liberated soul, Jivan Mukti. Beautiful. My teacher used to say that. We're waiting for you, he'd say, you Westerners, we're waiting for you to produce a Jivan Mukti, a Jivan Mukta, one who has attained Jivan Mukti. Because he was looking at his congregation and not seeing any free souls there, you see. That's a high standard, by the way, getting free of nature, getting free of birth and death. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and say, I'm there, like some people. You're going to have to practice, and you're going to have to earn the grace of your own self, you see. You're standing in the way of your own self. The lower self is standing in the way of the great self. If you want all of this put in a very simple way, and then we'll go on to the next verse. Sri Ramakrishna said, the potter puts his pots in the sun to dry, both the baked ones and the unbaked ones. So I've seen this in India when I was there. So it puts pots out in the road. Some of them are soft still, but some of them are, hard already. A cow happens to walk over them and break some of them. The baked pot shards that are broken, he throws away. But the soft ones, though broken, he gathers up and shapes them into a lump. From this lump, he forms new pots. In the same way, so long as a man has not realized God, he will have to come back to this earth, to the potter's hands. So hopefully, you're not soft, is kind of the idea. You want to be one of these pots that the cow walked over. Holy cow, just like shattered it all, right? You don't come back again if that. It's your last birth. It's your last body. You're free of rebirth in nature. That's Kaivalya. And now you're a candidate for Jivan Mukti, freedom from all bodies. And Videha Mukti comes next. Videha means, Deha means bodies. Videha means no bodies anymore. It's hard to imagine or envision, but this is what Brahman is, isn't it? Bodiless, formless, ever free, never bound. Because if you're in a form, you suffer. It doesn't matter what form you're in. An angel suffers, a god suffers. You don't think the Trinity suffers? Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva? All the beings in the seven worlds are under their control, and they're feeling everything come back from them, you see. And they're having to try to instruct them. And so there's no, freedom for them, as they're taking on the karma of everyone. So bodilessness formlessness is this extremely high, subtle ideal. Samadhi is the best word for it, or Satori in Zen. And we don't have a philosophy around it, except in India. The world doesn't talk about formlessness. No religion talks about formlessness. It's either paradise or kingdoms of heaven or this and that form, this and that world. But India, with its Advaita Vedanta, came forward and they told you about formlessness, beyond bodies. And that's why I chanted those practitioners of blissful dissolution, right? They dissolved the mind stream because the mind was what was producing bodies and worlds. So you can't blame it on God. God is acreate. You're misunderstanding God, Brahman, Yahweh, Allah. You're misunderstanding that principle. It is formless and pure, ever, always. It doesn't enter into creation, or it's actionless. Yo Brahmanan Vidadati Purvam, Yo Vai Vidampsya Prahinohi Tasmai. It's pure, indivisible, actionless, and divine, the Upanishads say. And the Upanishads are written by these rishis who just meditated on it until it showed up. Like Buddha sat for 49 days, right? Just, there it is. Now I'm the awakened one, you see. Now I have nirvana. It's the same with Jivan Mukti. You set it up and you wait for it. So Ramchandra says, enlightenment dawns on the mind by stages. He told his disciple that. Enlightenment dawns on the mind by stages. It's not like lighting a match in a dark room. Sri Ramakrishna said, where all of a sudden you can see something, it went out, I burnt my fingers, So that's a glimpse, that's called an insight. But samadhi that lasts, it comes and stays, that's what the Avadhut has. So let's look at what else he's telling us in the remaining time. He's talking about the six passions. He's talking about supernatural agencies and the magic that it casts over souls. Chimerical illusion, And what to speak of these? The physical world has many blemishes, and they cannot touch me, he says. So he's like facing off with negativities. Father of yoga is like that too, Patanjali. This is Raja Yoga, not Hatha Yoga, but the Raja Yoga system with Patanjali, the father of yogas, faces off with these negativities. These poisons have to be neutralized with nectar, because inferior regimens cannot neutralize the poisons of karma and the samskaras in your mind. You're going to have to find a nectar, like a great medicine, to insert in there, to inject. My teacher used to say, the West needs an injection of non-duality, and I'm here to give it. So if you talk in that vein, then you talk like an Advaita Vedantist. And here's a chart that I put together that will present to us. And many of these charts are in the book right back here on the table, Footfalls of the Indian Rishi. I put 300 of those charts in the book with these teachings, so that people could, and commentaries, so people could look back on them and begin to remember the truths that come to us from Mother India. I mean, Buddha was a Hindu, so I mean, you can't really separate Buddhism from India. You must know. It's not like, Jesus was blue-eyed, with fair skin, probably olive-eyed, So religion tends to take these things out of context of the particular time in which these beings were born and the particular race in which they associated with, in order to give these teachings to them. Because Jesus was also giving non-dual teachings, like I and my Father are one. He's also giving teachings on discrimination. Birds have nests, foxes have holes. You don't have any place to lay your head here. So he wouldn't spare the rod, with his disciples. He'd tell them, what are you doing here on earth? Come to the Garden of Gethsemane and meditate with me, he was telling them. But what happened to meditation in Christianity? John was meditating all the way until he died in a cave after Jesus passed. So, I mean, these are great spiritual arts, and they have to be brought back in a certain way that doesn't leave them in the hands of people who are just sitting for a couple hours and say, I did my meditation today, But what did you meditate upon? The very best thing to meditate upon is your own self, in your heart. Adihi sa samyoga namitta hetu, paras trikala dakala pi dristaha. Tam vishvarupam bhavabhuta mijjam. Beautiful chants in Sanskrit. It says, meditate upon the Lord as thine own self, seated in your heart. That's the first line of this 5,000-year-old scripture. In very good English, meditate upon the Lord, where? Up there? Out there? As a birded person on a cloud? No, as thine own self. And where is it? It's within you, seated in your own heart. And it's beyond the three phases of time. And it's beyond Stanatrayam. And it's beyond Kalatrayam. He just sang that to us. Stanatrayam, it's beyond waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Kalatrayam, it's beyond past, present, and future. You can just put the English straight to these Sanskrit words with no doubt of what they mean. There's no pulling of the wool over the eyes. There's no hiding the truth in Vedanta. It just means what it says. And I hope you have a mind that's fit and fettle enough to just hear it and realize it. You may have to meditate upon it a while. Shravana is to hear, manana is to roll it around in your mind for a while until it's distilled. And then nididasana means, I got it. I realize it. It's true. So in this chart, you can see some of the three pillars. I based it on this three pillars, the incomparable views of an Advaita Vedantist. So what is a great soul like that sitting and watching all of this play in the three worlds, these three pillars, you see? What is he or she? Because there are Avadhutas too. When there are seers and there are seeresses. There are rishis and there are rishinis, women rishis. So all the way through India, you had these beings that were withdrawing from the fray and detaching from phenomena and developing their witness consciousness. See, this is what you're going to have to do in order to get this ability to detach and watch without emotion. The minute you get emotional about something that's unreal, it draws you back in and you've fallen off the non-dual pedestal or platform. So non-emotionalism is always enjoined. That's why it's there in Zen in a big way. So you're going to have to be able to witness these things. So, for instance, right at the beginning, we start just taking a few of these in the remaining time. God does not create worlds. The mind does that in its individual, collective, and cosmic forms via its innate powers of cosmic projection. So this is Sankalpa from the Trinity, from the great mind. But it's all coming from God's mind. It's not coming from Brahman itself, which is transcendent of those things. So when you heard that, the Advaita Vedantist would be teaching you or would be thinking in his or her mind, transformation is a myth. Anything that changes is not Brahman. That would be the rule of thumb. And so my choice of things is to deny transmigration because it's change and accept non-origination. That nothing's ever born, nothing ever dies. It's just showing itself to me, then it's not, then it is, then it's not. It comes into form, then it goes into formlessness. But when it goes to formlessness, it didn't die. And when it came into form, it wasn't born. It's not that hard, to jump to this philosophy, even to entertain it in your mind for a little while and see what a vast difference that makes in your life compared to this pablum that they're feeding you in religion nowadays as a philosophy or as a path. Just entertain these truths for a little while, and all of a sudden you're beginning to feel like your old self again. That is, your eternal self. I feel free. Breathless air of heights. I felt like I just climbed a mountain, Muhammad said. And I can see everything now from here. I'm free, I'm free. The next entry there, God does not bless or curse anyone or anything. The law of karma brings about just fruits. Accordingly, that's all. But you might have seen how rich people get rich and poor people get poor, and good people have horrible things happen to them, bad people get good things. See, that's all the law of karma that's going around in this Kala chakra, Buddha called it, this wheel of time. But what did the Avadhut just tell us? That it's beyond the three phases of time. It doesn't transform. Everything in time transforms, but I don't. So I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite light space. So, you might say, oh, sky, that gets pollution, but the ether doesn't. So let's default to the infinite ether. I'm unchanging like that. Ether, in India, there's 5 kinds of ether. What do we have? One kind of ether. Physical. So if you don't know about the other 4 kinds of ether that underlay the physical ether, these other worlds or these subtler worlds that you've actually visited with your 5 dream senses in last night, that one of them you visited was the realm of the ancestors and the prana. I had a beautiful dream last night, for instance, that I was with the Vaishnavas and they were initiating me. And I went through this whole initiation with them. But I'm not really a Vaishnava, I'm a Vedantas, but this feels good. And so I was like a good 10 or 15 minutes of dream time, or of waking time maybe, in which I was being initiated as a Vaishnava. And it was beautiful. I woke up thinking about it. So I went to that place with these beings and had this experience and came back to earth remembering it. So this is good if you can translate your experience of waking, with 30, 50, in my teacher's case, 80 years of spiritual practice, into your dream state and bring it back and forth. And instead, of being subject to the 1,000 imbecilities of the mind. That's how Vedanta calls most people's dreams. 1,000 imbecilities of the mind. They never helped me. They never transformed me. They hurt me. They made me brood. They made me think I was worthless. So I give them up. I renounce them. So this first pillar we're looking at here, the next entry is observes time and space as relative laws that ultimately dissolve into timeless awareness. So that's why I just chanted this Trikala Drista. I'm the seer Drista of the three phases of time. If they didn't realize that, then they feel like these three phases of time are going on, and that's where they're being born, they're living, and they're passing away in this stream of birth, life, death, and rebirth, which Buddha called samsara. But if you can observe time and space as relative laws, then you can begin to develop remembrance of, I should say, the fact that that the soul, the Atman, your Buddha nature, if you want to call it that, is timeless. So it's not just now birthless and deathless. We're going to add timeless to it, because those two need to connect. So this is called, as you can see here, 3 pillars of Advaita Vedanta. So that first one has these entries. The second one, if we look at it, has these entries. This second pillar of Advaita Vedanta frees one from the small self and from the dream of finitude and attains non-transmigration. So as the great souls have put an end to their rounds of birth and death and ignorance, but you can see that they keep coming back with higher wisdom. So when they're born again, they're not really born. They're assuming a body, and they're keeping intact the memory of their past lifetimes, like Krishna did on the battlefield of Gita. Beings remember the functions and import of matter and life force, and they render them into the Devatma Shakti. See, so Devatma Shakti means the original divine power, mother power. Devatma means godlike or divine. Shakti means mother power. So they take all these functions of the body-mind mechanism and they render them back into her. So again, it's like this dissolution of the mind stream of thought. You deify it, you divinize it, and then you dissolve it back into its source. And this is called involution, not just, we're kind of caught in the West on this outward going sensuous, but it's an outward going evolution too that leaves us in space and in matter without any place to retreat to. But in India, they always put this together with involution. There's a series of worlds and tattvas going out from the great mind, but you have to then get off of that Kala chakra, reverse the trend, store up your power that is usually going out with the senses, and then use that power to get on the return to involution back to the source. So that's what all of the philosophies of India, not just Advaita Vedanta, have is a great blessing for us, that there is an involution of everything back to its source. So anyone who's talking about that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, if they heard about that and they didn't really study the philosophy, that came from Mother India. That's her gift, involution. So if you're talking about, I'm a soul, or Kingdom of Heaven is within you in Christian circles, or if you're just talking about, the third eye, something like that, back in those early times, all of that really came from this idea that there's an involution going back to a source. I have a source. And now I have to sort of take into consideration the steps that involution offers me. That's why we looked at the palette of future births. When the Avadhut said there that it seems like incarnating and evolving back is really senseless. And it is that way once you've had this realization of detaching from phenomena and objects and senses, and following this track back into the source of your being. We call that Atman in Vedanta, Atman. But Buddha nature is another good term for it. And then what I mentioned before, this on this second pillar, basically he realizes that activities, movement, and karma all take place in nature, not in yourself. If they take place in yourself, it's taking place as a dream in yourself. So dream or awake, you must get yogic insomnia and wake up. And wake up forever, once and for all. And don't fall back to sleep again. We're setting just the 3 pillars here to inform us about what the Avadhut it means when he talks about this legerdemain, that souls of legerdemain means this kind of trick that's been pulled upon the soul, that it now believes it's a body, it believes it was born in nature, it's going to die in nature, it only has one lifetime, and there's a God somewhere up above that's going to save it or not, or send it to hell. All of that's legerdemain, you see. It's like a sleight of hand. And the Avadhut is sitting there, and the Advaita Vedanta is sitting there and said, how did people fall into believing into that in the first place, you see? Never was true, and it's not true now. The only truth is he, the living. You see, that's the eternal life. He's having an eternal life, not a birth and a death and a life in Maya and a rebirth. Now that soul is living eternally in the truth. And it can do whatever it wants now. It can be born, it can die, it can take on bodies, give them up. But now it's understood all the dynamics of birth, growth, death, and rebirth. And it's very clear about that, and being clear about that, then you can see back to the palette there that it's definitely had its first conscious death. In Buddhism, we call that what? Bodhisattva. In Vedanta, we call that Jivan Mukta. Yeah, that soul's a Jivan Mukta. So in both those traditions, you have this soul that woke up completely and already had its conscious death. In Buddhism, now there's 10 pure lands to be born in. 10 pure lands is a beautiful teaching. There's a chart in that book on it. See how the Bodhisattva can now perfect itself, not its Buddha nature, because that was always perfect, but help others to realize their ever-perfect Buddha nature and awaken them. Because Buddha said, I'm ever awake, so we must now become ever awaked and settle ourselves into this truth and live in it every day. So the last pillar there in the remaining couple minutes prescribes that Advaita Vedanta prescribes sadhana. rather than works or wealth as a solution for suffering, illness, and death. Suffering, illness, and death, of course, is three of the transformations, which cause you to think, well, God must not suffer those things, so God must be beyond the six transformations, therefore changeless. So what I'm going to need to do here is to listen to these teachers who've got a practice for me and a high philosophy to tune into, and even a religion with a God with form to worship. And I'll put all these together, and then now I'll realize that 100,000 works are not going to enlighten me, nor is $100,000. None of those are going to enlighten me, nor are, as Shankara says, hundreds and thousands of breathing exercises going to enlighten me, nor are 100,000 asanas going to enlighten me, he says in his Vivekachudamani. So I'm going to change my mind into this Advaita Vedanta sadhana. It's a beautiful phrase that came to us some 30 years ago, and we took it to India, and all the Swamis loved that. So what do you like most about this journal we're putting out? I like that phrase that you used, Advaita Vedanta sadhana, is that you're aware of non-dual truth. You're also aware that the mirror of the mind can collect dust. See? So I need to wipe that mirror clean every day in order to continue to be aware of the truth of my Atman, or of my Buddha nature. So that's what sadhana does for you. So that's why it's at a pillar of Advaita Vedanta. And the last one here, and then we'll head for our conclusion, is that the soul moves through work, duty, and dharma to the goal of non-dual wisdom and love of God. So these are where those two things, love and wisdom, come together perfectly. They're not exclusive of one another. That is, devotion and discrimination work very well together. If you can then add meditation, you've got a winning combination. So this system is called the four yogas. Swami Vivekananda said, action, non-action, wisdom, and devotion. Those are called the four yogas. So karma, bhakti, jnanam, and raja. And these four yogas were taught by Sri Krishna to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. They're called Chaturjasya there, four yogas. And Vivekananda has come in 1893 and he says, I've brought you back the new religion of this age. It's called the four yogas. But Advaita Vedanta is not a religion. It's a statement of fact. It's a statement of the highest truth. And you can then always settle into that and therefore believe these great words that the Avadhut is teaching you about the subject of Advaita Vedanta, or non-duality. And that's what will be the title of my talk at New Thought Church in a couple of weeks, is non-duality, your immortal nature. You never are born, you never die, but you're an eternally living divine entity. And you're just taking on bodies and giving them up as if in a dream. But now we need to wake up to the fact that the dreamer is the important, as Ramana Maharshi said. The dreamer is important, not the dream. So get that yogic insomnia, and meditate on it. And so he concludes at the end of every verse, Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Avahana Krishna Saptami Dina Punitava Vacharada Loka Parama Karunamaya Avatar Karunamaya Avatar Jananim Sharanam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padme Shroditritva Pranamami Mahur Pranamami Mahur